Welcome to Getting to Know You. We are doing something that we think is a good idea, and that is not celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. only on his birthday, but to remember that there are many injustices in this world that he identified and that we still need to work on. And I'm so glad to be able to be talking with my friend and former neighbor, Joy Tsuzuki, about that topic exactly, and what we know about the past injustices and what we all are sort of experiencing continually. Before I start the conversation with Joy, though, I went to the movie Selma that was shown here on the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. and watched the march, both in the old footage as well as what the director created. And it reminded me that right here at Stonebridge, we had one of those brave people. I'd like to pay tribute to Henry Drury, who died here in 2014. His wife, Annette Lieberson, was known to many people. Henry was brought up in Selma, and he went back to be in the march in Selma at the same time that in his professional life and his personal life, he was a warrior for justice, having been a teacher in Princeton High School for 16 years, going to Princeton University and starting the teacher preparation program there, and then going on in other many ways that were important in dealing with justice and encouragement of young people. He also wrote a book, America, with a partner. That's a history book. I showed it to Joy, and you said, oh, that looks, I might be able to use that. It is an incredible book, and it was done in 1970. It belongs to me, but I'm going to try and find one for the library because it really is such an amazing summary and obviously very thick. But so here's to Henry, remembering him as one of those warriors for justice, and who was right in our midst. So, Joy, I'm going to ask you first to tell us a little bit about what we often talk about at dinner, like where did you grow up? What's your background? Because that's important for this topic.
I was born in New York City in 1930. My father was working for a Japanese trade company in the city, and that's why I was born in New York City. But at age, just the day after my 11th birthday, actually, my mother and I had to leave New York City to go to Japan, because as soon as FDR was elected in the November 1940 election, the Japanese business community in New York City assumed or believed that war would be imminent, so the trading companies started sending their dependents home. And that's how I left my place of birth and 10 years of living, going to New York City Public School, to go to Japan, where from that would be my sixth grade elementary school until graduating college in Tokyo. I attended the Japanese all-girls private school in Tokyo.
And that was all during the war.
Yes. So the war broke out in December of 41. My start in Tokyo was February 41.
Right. Well, and that early period of time, when the war first started, Japanese people, both citizens as well as people who had lived here for many years, and people like your father, were taken away and went and were put in what we just vaguely know about reparation encampments. I'm sorry, not reparation.
Concentration camps.
Concentration camps, yes. And I mentioned to you that I was reading a book about a family in Berkeley that had been there for 30 years, and one night, 3 big, burly FBI agents appeared at the door and made the father in the family leave in his pajamas and with no slippers, and the family then did not hear from him again. And when I told you that, you said, well, you had a sort of a version of that because your father, being in the East, was treated probably better than people in the West that I had read about. So tell us what happened.
Well, I would say incredibly better. The December 8th, the night of Pearl Harbor, my father happened to be in Miami, Florida, in a hotel. 2 FBI agents came to the hotel where he was staying and told him he was under arrest as an enemy alien. But my father, being a sort of character, said he never goes out without taking a shower. And the 2 FBI agents said, go take your shower. He, stalling for time, took the longest shower he could. When he came out, he found that the agents had packed his suitcase. So he said he had a special way of packing suitcases, and that wasn't the right way. So the agents patiently said, all right, do it your way. He dumped everything out and repacked his suitcase, stalling for time. And by then it's close to dawn, so he tells them, well, I have 2 Palm Beach suits down at the cleaners downstairs. If you can wait till they open, I'd like to pick them up. But then they said, look, you're not going to need those suits in jail, so you come with us. So he got on their car to be taken to jail, and he told them, well, it's almost morning, he's very hungry, he'd like to stop for breakfast on the way to jail. And to me, incredibly, they stopped at a diner, and my father said they were very gentlemen, no indication of a man being arrested at all, but my father offered to treat them. They wouldn't accept his treating, had him sit at the front, and they sat at near the exit where they could see him, but not at the same table. They only had coffee, but my father had a very large, leisurely breakfast, knowing he was going to jail. And then he was taken in jail. And he did have the jail experience in Florida.
I remember about your father that you told me that while he was in business in New York, he wanted to keep up with his golf game. And just as an indication of the kinds of prejudices, you told me that he did find a place to play golf.
Yes, the Japanese businessmen in New York City at the time, this is the 1930s, were not allowed to play at golf courses in the New York City area, and they had to travel to Somerville, New Jersey to play golf. So my father and I had 2 uncles in New York City, and with their Japanese friends, they would get up, must have been pre-dawn, Sunday morning, to drive to Somerville to play golf. And even where I lived, we lived in the Bronx, in a Jewish neighborhood, and I was told later that there were many areas in New York City where Japanese were not allowed to live, but the Jewish neighborhoods were welcoming. So I'm sure that's why we lived there.
Right. Let's jump way ahead to sort of now, because like most Americans, I knew that something like that happened in terms of taking people away without telling them their rights, it didn't make any difference if you had lived here for 30 years and become a citizen. Not all Japanese were, of course, allowed to do that, but children were born here, they were citizens, and yet they were taken away. I lived in South Jersey, and I knew that there were Japanese prisoners brought to Seabrook Farms. If they had behaved well, they were taken out of the camps and taken there, in effect, for doing forced labor. But one day you came and you had been visiting your daughter, and you said to me, Ingrid, I think you would be interested in this. And I really am. And it's a brochure about a machi in Colorado, a place in Colorado, in the very desert part where nobody could live. And it's really, I think, the first time that kind of encampment has been preserved. And at first I thought it was the buildings, but then you told me there was nothing there.
Absolutely nothing, just bare, not even trees, tumbleweed, anyway, just barren, as far as the eye could see.
And it was the state of Colorado that had decided to make that a commemorative park.
Yes.
And they were beginning to think, there's wonderful pictures, the whole story is in here. And after I looked at that, I thought, here is something that I have never known about. And I remember that about 2 or 3 years ago, people learned about how a large part of Tulsa, Oklahoma, was burned down, and that was the place where black people lived, middle class, a whole community. And people would say to me, "Did you know about Tulsa?" And I really feel like we have to be saying, "Do you know about Amash?" Because it tells a story that we have not really known. And you actually went to this site.
Visited. It's been designated very recently a national park in Colorado, and my daughter, living in a suburb of Denver, took me. But I had heard the stories of the concentration camps and know many people, including relatives, who had experienced that incarceration. But seeing it is another experience.
Yeah. And of course, there won't be anything to see there until some buildings are built to demonstrate what life was
Barracks
like.
have been torn down now.
But, right.
Yes.
But let's jump ahead a little bit, because we'd have to face also that there's been discrimination against Japanese people here in our country. And I remember you told me that was what your husband first had to confront when he came to graduate school in Illinois.
Right.
Yeah.
Champaign-Urbana,
Yeah.
Illinois. Yes. So when my husband, having graduated Tokyo University, he was admitted at the grad school chemistry at the U of I, and he wanted to rent a room, and there was an ad about grad students only, and these are private homes where they open up rooms for students, student housing. But when he went there, it was in the summer, he wanted to start renting from the semester coming in the fall. The landlady, the lady of the house, came to the door through the screen, saw him, and what she said is, "Oh, the other students here would not want to use the same bathroom as you, so I cannot rent to you." Now, I find that very insulting, but that's what he was told. And I know, he was my fiance at the time, but he never looked like a homeless, slovenly, I mean, if you had seen him, you would know. But anyway, he was told that the other students would not want to share a bathroom, so she couldn't rent. There was also a barbershop incident in Champaign on campus.
You want to tell us about that quickly? Well, I shouldn't laugh about that, but it is.
The campus barbershops went on strike that they would not cut black students' hair because the texture is different, or they didn't know how to handle the black hair. But there were students who, of course, protested that, and what they did is they had an African student, I don't know exactly where, but he was a tribal chieftain's son studying at the U of I, and they had him dressed in his tribal outfit. I shouldn't say costume because that was...
No, it's clothing.
But of course he's fluent in French. His main language is French, and they had him go to one of the campus barbers, speaking only French, dressed the way he was, and the barber had no problem. He cut his hair. So the not being able to cut was meant for black local students. American blacks' hair, they didn't want to cut, but if you were a tribal chief's son from Africa, your hair was all right. I mean, but that did stop the strike. I mean, the barbers decided they could cut everyone's hair.
We shouldn't laugh, but those kinds of things are still happening today. You also told me that when you were looking for a home after you were married and had children and were looking in the suburbs of Chicago, there was definitely no willingness to show you a house in certain neighborhoods.
Yes, this is the southern I believe it's Berkeley area of Chicago, where at that time my husband had gotten his PhD, and we were ready to, he had a job, and we were ready to look for housing. And when I called on the phone to make the appointment, she didn't recognize that I was foreign or not white or whatever she needed to know. And when I got there and saw me, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's already been taken." And this happened a couple of times. So I mentioned, I've forgotten the name of the organization at that time, was dealing with discrimination toward non-whites in the area, and they said they would be happy to take up our case, but I would have to document each and every phone call and everything. Oh, in fact, at that very house that I was refused, being told that it was already taken, I returned home, called again, of course anonymously, not identifying myself, and she again didn't recognize and said, "Oh, please do come. Well, I'd like to show you the house."
Right.
It was obvious it was my physical features that did not allow her to rent to me.
Right.
And even our realtor said, "Oh, I would love to be your neighbor, except it's those people who don't understand," or whatever.
Right. Well, what's a big coincidence is that Henry Drury, who I mentioned first, was my neighbor and friend, and we had exactly the same issue in our neighborhood because both blacks and whites lived there. Real estate agents would not show our homes in when somebody came to call. But I guess what we all know and why we're talking today about Martin Luther King is that we still have that kind of discrimination and in our society and injustices in all places that we really need to work on. And so I think I will say that at the end of March, you are going to be talking about your book and can expand a little bit on both your experience
Even my daughter.
and with the daughter and
experience.
your co-author. So we'll look forward to that. And remember that Martin Luther King Jr. created a pathwork, as this little newsletter that I get from Trenton said, for a better life for Black Americans, for making us all think about peace in this country with everyone respected, but it's only a pathway, and we have to get on that pathway. It's not done yet. So I think you would agree.
Totally.
Thank you so much for
Thank
talking
you.
with us all, Joy Tsuzuki, and we look forward to getting news about your book talk at the end of March, okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's it for today. Remember, there is that pathway, and we can all walk on it.